The following program is presented by Ride the Wave Media. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for all our videos at Ride the Wave Media Podcast. Enjoy the program.
Welcome. We are here with another rendition of What We Are Watching, an extension of, if you listened to Blaine and I, when we did our whole Which Movie project back in the September-October time of the year. We're going to extend that a little bit with some episodes of What We Are Watching. And I've invited Kate Kendrick to be on here with me. Hi, Kate.
Hi there, Courtney. How are you?
Good. So, Kate, tell us a little bit about what qualifies you to talk about the movie. We both are super fascinated and very excited to talk about, Heretic. Tell me where you come from on that.
Yeah, I grew up as a strong believing member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And the two protagonists in this movie are missionaries from this church. I also served a mission when I was 21. And when I think I'm really excited to talk about it. I had kind of a midlife unraveling, if you will, just last year, where I left my career in teaching. I taught elementary school for 18 years and left the Mormon faith and left my marriage and a lot of different major life situations. And I started a TikTok. It's under Midlife Exmo. And I've just been sharing my journey. And the part of my journey that sticks most is this faith deconstruction. And being raised in a predominant religion here in Utah has been one way of viewing the world. And then after leaving, it's come something entirely different. And so I've been sharing that journey, and I'm beginning to start expanding my product. I'm going to be moving to YouTube and to Instagram and writing a book in this next little while. So I'm using all of my life experience and the lessons I've learned on the way to help reach ex-Mormons, former members like myself, help with validation, with empathy, boundaries, and holding people accountable who do harm.
Yes, thank you so much for the work that you do. And I think that your TikTok has blown up into really becoming very popular because there is such a following.
Yeah. There's
so
a really big...
Oh,
yeah, there's a really big community where people feel like they need to talk about it. And I open up a space for people to share their experiences and to be critical of our experiences as well, and just to provide different perspectives.
Yeah. And for myself, doing the healing work and in energetic and emotional healing world, I really have a very particular soft spot for people who are going through something like that. It's a big transition, big life transition, a lot of triggers, a lot of belief systems that come flying up in your face all the time, and figuring out the world from a new lens. That's a very difficult thing to go through. So I particularly my heart goes out to anybody going through that.
Thank you.
My own experience, I did grow up Mormon as well, but maybe in a more nuanced way. So I didn't serve a mission, and I didn't have quite the same, what you would maybe call an egoic death during the deconstruction of faith. I did have a moment where I said, you know what, officially, this religion is not for me. And never went back. So I did go through it in my own way, just not in the same way that I think a lot of people who grew up in the culture, in the religion, it being part of their entire life and
their identity. Yeah.
He might go through something quite difficult. But I did come to see this movie, Heretic, and I did come from that, background. And then I'm very much involved in some of the Lost and Found Club that's here in Utah. They're trying to create spaces for people who have left the Mormon Church into finding their community. And I'm very much an advocate of that. I'm very much like, I want to be more and more involved in that space. So shout out to the Lost and Found Club, who also did their own movie screening of the movie so that people could go and see it together, which I love. So let's get into it. Let's talk about this movie. First of all, opening sequence, 2 Mormon missionaries on a park bench getting ready for their day, obviously getting ready to do their bike riding and walking, because that's what a lot of people know Mormon missionaries do. They go out doing their what do they call it? Tracking.
Proselytizing or tracting. Yeah.
Yeah. So, hilarious conversation, I thought, between these two missionaries. And I will reference one of the bloggers that I came across when doing some research was from Scripture Central. She's a LDS member, and she did a whole breakdown. What's right? What did they get right? What did they get wrong? And she was very like, oh, this is not realistic. Two Mormon missionaries talking about pornography or sexual relations. That would never happen. And I wasn't a missionary, but I'm not gonna say that never happens.
Right. Right. And that was my experience, like growing up in the church, and I went on and I was very rigid Latter-day Saint. I personally never would have talked about that sort of thing. That's my experience. And I listened to a Mormon Stories podcast with the two creators, the two writers of Heretic. And neither of them grew up Mormon, but they were Mormon adjacent, I guess, where they had family members, friends who were members of this church. And they said, okay, that's fine that maybe some missionaries wouldn't talk about this, but our missionaries did. Our characters did.
Yeah.
And so I cannot for 1 minute imagine that there are no missionaries out there who would not talk about it. You know, there were missionaries on my mission who got jobs. They wouldn't do the proselyting. They went and they worked at like, they broke the rules. There are missionaries who break the rules and in major ways, and then in like smaller ways like this, you know? So
yeah. I mean, please, I came from a very small town in Utah, where it was, you know, just a very focused, concentrated, small town of Mormon culture. And, some of the conversations among those very well-intentioned, deeply in the church members, yeah, I could totally see this conversation happening. So, but my favorite part is the way they did it, the way they had this conversation, because even as I was listening, my first thought, and I knew it was going to come up, was the other missionary, Sister Barnes, played by Sophie Thatcher, asking Sister Paxton, were you watching this pornography? And she's like, oh, and then she has to backtrack. She's like, oh, well, no, I mean, I just happened to come across it, and I just, no. But the way that she uses this experience of watching pornography to prove that there is a soul and there is a God, because she thought this, you know, porn actress definitely, you know, felt a certain way about her lifestyle and about what she was doing. That all feels absolutely, totally realistic. And
I totally agree. I found myself doing the same thing. Like, oh, I've got to justify what I was doing. And it wasn't what it looked like.
Yeah, because at first she's just kind of and skirting around certain words where she's like, you know, where he took the thing, and, you know, she's not actually going to say, I'm like, this is so realistic. Even if most of the time missionaries wouldn't engage in that conversation, I still thought it was done in a very realistic way. So
yeah,
let's just call it what it is.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So then we get to the main part of the movie is going to be coming to Mr. Reed's house, and there's a lot of really like foreshadowing. You know, the bike lock, she's locking it and putting the key in her pocket and stuff. And so I'll just point out, we reviewed quite a few, well, at least a few A24 movies in our Witch Movie project, like Midsummer. And this movie just falls right in line with lots of foreshadowing, lots of little details. Viewers are really going to want to pay attention because everything's going to come up later. So we get to Mr. Reed, played by Hugh Grant, obviously.
Oh, he was remarkable in this role. Remarkable.
Yeah, I loved seeing his interview on Seth Meyers, because that's when I learned and found out that the actresses Sophie and Chloe East, who plays Sister Paxton, were members of the church.
Yeah, they grew up in the church. And I listened to a podcast or saw a video where the directors talked about how, like, yeah, they tried all of these different actors. And then when they came in to audition, they're like, they've got something special. They have something special that the other actors don't. And it was, oh, they were members of the church and they understand like the cadence and the way of treating people. And it translated so well in the movie. Like I could see myself as a sister missionary in both of those sisters, you know, particularly Sophie. I'm sorry, I forgot her name. Sister Barnes.
Thatcher.
Yeah. Sophie Thatcher. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there is just a certain, and now I grew up in the Midwest for the most part, and then moved to the small town in Utah where I'm also from. So I'm kind of from different, and like I said, in a family that was a little bit more nuanced. My parents, raised us in the church, but was also kind of like, we're not really sure we believe it either, kind of a vibe. So, so I grew up in sort of a open-minded, all views are welcome kind of a vibe, but my extended family being very much in the church, and being from a small town and growing up in the Midwest and knowing the church there versus here in Utah, there is a very particular, like you said, like a cadence, a way of talking, a very particular culture. I always was, I always say to people, I had extreme culture shock being a member of the church in the Midwest and then moving as a teenager to Utah and going to church here. I was like, what is happening? This is so different. I don't know what I am. I don't know who I am. I don't know. I had very severe identity crisis issues.
Sure.
Because it was just so different and it felt so different. And I felt different about myself. So there is something about, the way these actresses, they knew how they needed to respond to things. And I mean, so that's giving them a ton of credit for being the right people for this role.
Absolutely. They did a phenomenal job.
And then I love that that there is sort of a theme throughout the entire movie. So the beginning, middle, and end, we have a reference to butterflies, right? Mm-hmm. What did you think about that?
I was a little lost at first. I thought maybe it was a little bit too much, but especially at the end, just as you think about the transformation of a butterfly, you start as this caterpillar and then you're cocooned and then you're released into something beautiful. You think of the butterfly was associated with freedom, I think, and transformation and freedom to be who you really are. I thought that was a beautiful theme and reference. Maybe I was a little disappointed in the ending, which we'll get to later, but that was my own perspective. And I know everyone else views it differently, but it was neat that they did have that theme that just continued through the movie.
Right. Yeah. Because she mentions it at the beginning. Sister Paxton was like, well, when I come back after I died, they'll want to come back as a butterfly, which again, the LDS church history scripture experts would say, well, we don't believe in reincarnation. But I have met more nuanced members that, they do entertain the idea or belief of reincarnation. Like, maybe we do come back more than once. Who knows? Like, they're okay with that idea. So it isn't totally out of the realm of possibility that a missionary would say that.
Not at all. And I think sometimes people even do it joking. I mean, I used to say, like, when I come back in my next life, I'm going to be a dolphin trainer, just as something fun to say, like, oh, this is a dream that I would have for myself to show you a little bit more about who I am,
Yes. Yeah. So she mentions that. And then he mentions in the middle of the movie during like real chaos, terror time of the movie, he's mentioning the butterfly theory. And she, again, confuses it for the butterfly effect, butterfly, philosophy, like that. Is it the butterfly that dreams he's a man, or is it the man dreaming he's a butterfly? Kind of just bringing forward that, again, that theme that's throughout the entire movie, which is, are the things you think are real really actually real? And challenge that, which I think, to your point about butterflies being a symbol of transformation, is important, because a lot of people who go through a faith deconstruction, they often are comforted by the idea of the butterfly because the transformation they go through is very painful or seemingly painful, that a caterpillar has to completely deconstruct their entire body. Every cell turns into goo, or it can reconstruct into the butterfly. We all have moments like that in life, whether it's faith related or just something really, really hard and difficult we're going through. It's like, I have to completely break down every bit of who I thought I was to now figure out who I'm going to become.
Absolutely. Because the second part of deconstruction is reconstruction, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I left the church just a little over a year ago, and when I did so, it was around my 45th birthday, and my mother-in-law, who is my ex-mother-in-law, who was still a strong active member of the church, gave me a birthday present. And when I opened it, it was one of these beautiful wooden puzzles of a butterfly. And it was so touching and meaningful to me. I don't know that she necessarily meant it for what it was, but for me, I found such deep meaning thinking, yes, this represents this process that I'm going through. And it was so touching. So I don't know if she even knew what it meant to me, but it meant a lot.
Yeah, it often does during, that. So it's very appropriate to have that as sort of the symbol or theme throughout the movie, from my perspective. Yeah. And what you went through too. And I love how in a lot of people's faith deconstruction, there are a lot of points about Mormonism specifically that were at least touched on at one point or another during this movie. So even when he brings out the soda and there's a conversation about the word of wisdom, and because a lot of members, when they're in it, they're easily justifying that the word of wisdom makes sense. But when someone goes through a deconstruction, they're often like, it doesn't make any sense.
That I can't have a coffee, but I can have a big old 64-ounce monster drink or something like that, which is so not good for your health. You can't look at it as a law of health when it doesn't affect you positively.
Exactly. And I know that's a question that comes up so much, which I've had conversations with members. I've had conversations with non-members. I've had conversations with someone transitioning in that liminal space between, because it's not something that anybody can clearly give a good answer about, whether it's, is this doctrine? Is this, where are the rules? Where's the line? And where's the why in it all? Get a lot of different answers. Nobody seems to totally know. Is it hot drinks or is it just, so is hot cocoa not okay? Who know, like where? I even have a family member. Well, she's a family member of a family member, but she loved a certain like sparkling water drink that is flavored, and she just loved it. Like she was buying it by the case, just thought it was really, really good for her. And someone mentioned, well, there's a little bit of green tea in the ingredients. And she was horrified. Like, oh, I didn't know. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to drink this. And it was just kind of like, but then I know a lot of members who are very faithful members who love herbal tea, and then don't classify that as breaking the rules at all. So I just like that there was a little bit of a nod to it, a little bit of like, hey, we see you, we see this thread. And those of us maybe who have already deconstructed, who, go to the movie theater and watch this and go, oh my gosh, I totally get that reference.
That mental gymnastics you have to go through to make it make sense for you. Yeah,
exactly. Which, by the way, I do think that this scripture central reference that I'm going to bring forward as the representative of someone who's LDS who watched the movie and broke it down, I do feel like a lot of the answers she gave were mental gymnastics, which that's what you're going to get when you start asking those questions from someone who's still very much in it, very much believes all of it. They're going to go, oh, well, this makes sense because, and to that point, we'll get to the Joseph Smith story and Fanny Alger reference. So what did you think about that?
Well, first of all, I didn't know about it until I was 45 years old. I had no idea about Fanny Alger. And I was a staunch every Sunday, go to the temple, young women's president, Relief Society president kind of member. And I knew nothing about Fanny Alger until I left. And it was shocking to me to realize these things. And I think had I heard something like that as a member, I would have been like, oh, well, you don't have your facts. I mean, you don't have your facts straight.
Right.
Like that's anti-Mormon literature, and you need to go with the church approved literature, which is not, it doesn't allow for critical thinking for you to just say, you can only read these church approved resources and everything else outside of that is a lie. So I love the fact that Hugh Grant brought this up. I love the fact that he was able to get these girls to question their faith and their beliefs, because I think this needs to happen more often with members of the church. I think they need to be presented with ideas that don't fit the narrative they've been taught their whole life.
Yeah. Or even just bringing up that, and this is going to be, we'll talk about this more when we get into the deeper level of Mr. Reed's home. A question that, is your faith really hindered on all of these things being accurate and truthful, or is faith something bigger? Because that's always been a deep question for me, is when I'm presented with something like a story about Joseph Smith that paints him in kind of a not so perfect light. Even when I was in the church, and I don't know if I can even say that, when I was going to church, let's say that, when I was going to church regularly, I would be presented with an idea like that. I would be presented with like, what about this? And I would go, yeah, that probably happened.
Good for you.
For me, that wasn't like busting my bubble. It was just like, I mean, to think that a man constructed a whole story about what God wants him to do so that he could sleep with a young girl, that to me makes sense. Like, that's what the world has shown me that a lot of people are like. So for me to be like, did Joseph Smith do that? Yeah, he probably did. I'm not gonna deny it. But what's interesting is that the church, and a lot of people who defend the church in this particular area, will say, oh, well, there's never been definitive proof that, and we think that maybe he was just acting on his religious beliefs, and so that's what we're going to go with. But almost all of the constructed church history is going to be founded on people's personal journals that were written at the time. So if you're going to take that as fact, so too do you have to consider this as fact, because these were events and things written down in journals, personal accounts of the time, right?
Right.
So yeah, interesting that was brought up, and I'm glad that it was, and maybe it, possibly potentially would make somebody go, wait a minute, what's going on here? I'm going to look at this a little bit more. And then we start to get into it, like the heart of the movie getting more and more creepy. You start feeling like, I thought it was very interesting that they even entered the home without knowing for sure that there was a wife in that home.
I think that was a point that was made, though, because I think that so many of us praying about the church are very gullible, and we trust people without questioning, because we've been taught, like, the first law of the gospel, the first laws are obedience and sacrifice.
Oh, yeah.
Obedience and sacrifice. Above love, above trusting your instincts, it's obedience and sacrifice. And so for these girls to go in, like, they trust, because, oh, this is a nice man and he seems like he's very well intentioned. I could see myself doing that sort of thing. And also maybe relying on the spirit. Like, the spirit would never allow me to walk into a room or a home that would cause me any danger. But the problem with that thinking is there are a lot of missionaries that go out into the field that are hurt and or killed because they are not safe and protected. And I really love what this film did to draw attention to missionary safety or potential risks while out in the field.
Yeah. And then the conversation about really wanting to make sure that Sister Paxton gets her first baptism. I mean, that's a pretty deep motivator for like, well, it doesn't feel right or something doesn't feel right, but I really want to get that baptism. I really want to show that I'm doing God's work, and maybe this is it. This man seems very enthusiastic about learning the gospel, so we're going to head on in and we're going to, hope
Right.
test, and then he lures them deeper and deeper into the house. So, I mean, already they're locked in. They kind of can already feel something's wrong, but they have no other choice. The front door is locked. There's no other way out. The windows are not big enough to break or get out. So they're just like, here we go. We're going to go deeper into this home. So you get into like level 2 of Dante's Inferno. I mean, whatever you want to call it, but like each step is like one more space that he's lured them into. And then he starts really going into the religious aspects of iterations. He uses those, the songs as an example, and then the board games, Monopoly, showing them like, look, there's all of these different iterations of the same thing, which is basically what Christianity and even like major religions are.
Right.
The fear is palpable.
Oh, yes. They did a fantastic job at making you feel uncomfortable, at being creepy, at the lighting, the cinematography, the whole feel to it just made you feel really uneasy and really concerned for these sister missionaries.
Yeah. They keep asking different questions and try to like figure out how to get out of there. What I love about now, Hugh Grant has never been really praised for a lot of other roles, meaning that he has like a lot of range. He did a lot of rom-coms, which he called his blinky and stuttering phase of acting. But I feel like he found his niche in this movie. Like, this is where he is creepy, yet jolly, almost, I don't know, almost like charming.
Right. And this feigned sense of concern for these sisters, like, oh, you may die. Like, really, I'm concerned about this. Yeah. I mean, creepy.
Yeah. Oh, he just does such a great job because he even the cadence of his voice just changes to be like real the way he talks. And you're suddenly like put at ease for a second when he starts talking that way. And yeah, it's interesting because, and I don't know if you picked up on it, most people probably picked up on it, but they don't directly address it, I don't think, at any point, where he says several times, you're free to go at any time.
Right.
Like, I'm not keeping you. And he kind of says it like that many times, even when they're in the deepest level of his house, he says it. Which I think is really important because it says you may be being told you have a choice. The religion itself says it many times. Like, people have a choice. People have a
agency, free agency.
Exactly. But then you really have to consider, is it actually a choice? Is it really, how much of a choice is it when you have been lured and I don't know, this belief system has been cultivated in you from birth. Right. So, I mean, I don't know about you, but I find it almost hilarious, but also a little sad when you see the baptism cards come out. That's kind of a new cultural thing that people are doing nowadays. It's the new thing, is to have their child's baptism announced, and they do a special little photo shoot with the Book of Mormon and in front of the temple, and they send that out to everybody, and they always use the wording, they have chosen to be baptized.
They've not. No one choose. I mean, kids at 8, I taught 3rd graders for a very long time. Kids at the age of 8 still believe in Santa Claus. Like, how can they make this kind of decision for themselves? It's not developmentally appropriate to ask a child to decide on the religion that's going to dictate how they live the rest of their lives. On that same note, when my 17-year-old and I left last year, I guess they were 16 at the time, I had my 16-year-old baptized when they were 8 years old. And then when we wanted to leave the church, we went through quitmormon.org because we wanted our names removed. We did not want to affiliate with this church any longer. I had to get a lawyer involved. We had to get a notary signed by both their dad and myself to get my child to have their records removed. When they're 8, all they needed to do is say, yeah, sure, mom, dad, I'll do whatever you say. But in order to leave the church, they needed legal representation to take them out. And I just think that's just, especially when they're older and they can make that decision for themselves. It's not as easy as saying, yes, I'm choosing to leave the church. It's not that easy.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. It is very much like luring and then locking all the doors and then
Yes.
choice. And I love that there was that parallel that like you could actually like feel that. And just to extend that beyond baptism and everything else, it's well, their records, they say that their records start as like a member of the church when they're baptized, but actually it's their blessing when they're born, their names are in. I mean, it's a whole thing.
Yes.
One thing you can say about the Mormon Church is they are organized.
Yes, they are.
I mean, I hail them for that level of organization, but in record keeping.
Right.
But it's not only that. It's like, I once saw a TikTok video or a reel of a woman who was trying to go through a divorce and get alimony and custody, child, all of that figured out. The judge asking her, well, why hadn't you ever gotten a job? Why haven't you ever worked? Why haven't you ever, built these skills for yourself so that you can support yourself? And she's like, I've been taught my entire life from the Mormon Church and the culture there that I will be taken care of by my husband, by, that family and home is my primary purpose. That I even went to BYU and I went to the counselor's office to learn how to become, I think she said she wanted to be an environmental lawyer or international lawyer. She was like looking into going to law school, and they said, no, let's clear your schedule of all that. You don't need all that. You need this, this, and this. And I started giving her like the family, home, and planning, schedule, all that. She goes, I wasn't taught that I needed to support myself, that I would ever need to.
Right.
It's like, and I relied on my husband completely until the moment he decided he wanted to go marry a sex worker, which was her story. But that's the problem, is that they can up and leave. That husband could choose to up and leave anytime. And she's been taught her entire life that would never happen to her if she lived a perfect, righteous life. It just wasn't true. And that wasn't what happened. So to that same point, she didn't have a choice either. She didn't have a choice. She was raised to believe that this is how she should live her life and that this is the way to go. So she fled.
And she was probably taught her whole life, well, yeah, you do have a choice. You have a choice. You could leave your marriage if you want to, but is she? She has to face all of these consequences that she's not prepared for,
Right. Yeah. I mean, just breaks my heart that's how that's led up to that. But my favorite part of the movie, I can't leave that room yet until I mention the parallels or Christ archetypal mythology that when he reveals the curtain pulls up and he shows that the story of Christ and the Christ archetypal storyline is much older than Jesus. And I mean, there's a lot of arguments as to like, well, that's not quite what it should be. Blah, 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 blah. But the truth is, the story of Jesus, and I'm going to reference a book that I read personally, which is the Jesus and the Lost Goddess, talks about the Gnostic Christians versus the literal Christians, in that the mythology of Jesus was something that came from the Hebrews and the Egyptians far before, Jesus supposedly lived. This is really, really important to me because for me personally, and I still consider myself to be what I would say a Gnostic Christian, or, if I had a belief system that I maybe would tell people that I have, I would say, yeah, I still believe in Jesus. I still believe it, and I still this. But when it comes to faith, this is where it really you start to like talk about that. Because for me personally, is it important that Jesus of Nazareth, this person, existed, lived, actually literally did all those things in the New Testament and died, and then was resurrected miraculously 3 days later? Is it really our faith is based on the fact that that all actually happened? Or for myself, it doesn't matter to me if it's a mythology
I like that way of thinking
at all.
Yeah.
Because I personally believe when I study scripture, I will study Celtic mythology. I will study the Gnostic Gospels of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, or, for me, scripture or whatever I, choose to bring my faith towards, it would be something that makes me feel a certain way or makes me live my life better. It has nothing to do with whether or not this was like, is Caradwyn a real person? Did she actually live in Wales on Lake Tegid? Or, is Jesus a real person and did he actually live? Or does Buddha or Krishna or all these parallels that he brings up in the movie? What did you think about that part?
I thought it was fascinating and didn't make all those connections because growing up in the Mormon faith, I was always taught that we were the ones with the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Like we were the ones that were right and everyone else was wrong. So why on earth would I invest any of my time in studying another gospel or another religion when it didn't have the truth, when I had it?
Yeah.
So I never took the time to study other religions, other faiths, because so much of what I was told was you have the truth, everyone else is wrong. So I am not as well versed in other religions as I know you are and some of my other friends are, because I'm still full-time deconstructing my own faith and realizing some of these issues. And at some point, I consider myself agnostic right now. I believe that there's some kind of higher power, but I don't believe in the God that I was raised to believe in. And one day I'll figure that out. But one thing that I do love is the mystery. I love not being certain. I love not knowing and being open-minded. And I get to spend the rest of my life trying to discover what truth is or what truth is for me.
Right. For you. I mean, because when it's that level of faith or belief, as we'll get to the disbelief versus belief doorways, but when it comes to that, and when you say my truth, it means that whenever something is brought to your attention, when something is proven, like, for example, the story of Horus or the story of Krishna, these are the stories that really do have very significant parallels to Jesus' life. They have almost word for word the same type of storyline, same ages, these, that Jesus went off into the wilderness to fast. Well, that's in almost every one of their stories as well. Going to a temple at age 12, dying and coming back 3 days later. Or, I mean, again, he talks about it in the movie, but if you go back and you actually look at those stories, yeah, it's true. They do have very significant parallels to Jesus' life. But when that is brought to my attention or someone who has their truth, it doesn't faze you. It doesn't go, oh no, now everything I believe is wrong. It's like, okay, cool. Isn't that neat that we all have a similar story, and that the worshipers of one religion and another kind of they're all a little bit the same in a lot of ways.
Right. It was fascinating to hear that story. And if I were to go take time to do it, I would recognize that so much of it was the same. And I've had this brought to my attention too, that it's like the game of telephone, because these stories are hundreds, if not thousands of years old that have been passed down orally over generation after generation, or they've gone through translation after translation after translation from these different languages. And for us to have the same knowledge or the same context that they were in when they were originally spoken or written down, that's impossible. We can't have the same thing, because just like in that game of telephone, you will lose meaning and understanding.
Yeah.
Right?
Like he says, you have a memory of a memory. You don't have actually
Yeah.
the original thing anyway when you're thinking back on something.
Right.
And that's, I mean, as a collective human civilization, we're not telling the story or remembering that. We're just remembering the last time we told it, the last time we remembered it.
Right.
Which I just want to point out, the Star Wars reference, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, all of these are Christ archetypal stories. So,
right.
I mean, who knows? Somebody's going to pick up a copy of Harry Potter that's an anthropological study of our culture today, and they might be like, oh my gosh, this amazing miracle person, Harry Potter, that died and came back to life and saved everyone. And it's like, see, it's a powerful story. That's what counts, not whether or not it was a real person. So just point that out. And I love the research and detail that came from, that could be shown in this movie, that he had the Gordon B. Hinckley quote. I mean, that's the level of detail there. Love it. A24 movies, that's another thing I love about them, is they really do make sure that it's accurate to that level of detail. Yeah.
And I know that the writers of the story spent 10 years on this. They did not just do it overnight. They did a lot of research. I think one situation where they made a mistake was with the elder from the church that was played by Topher Grace. I remember watching this thinking, what kind of missionary is by himself?
I said the same thing. My sister and I saw it together, and I was like, there was a couple things I could see that were not quite, like, to me, anyway, this is just my perspective, but accurate as to what I know about growing up in the church.
Right.
That was one, was he was alone going out there looking for them. And I'm like, that would never happen. Missionaries have to be, with their companions. And the other one was the church he was cleaning. I have seen a lot of different churches. In fact, my branch that I grew up in Indianapolis was at the third floor of an office building. So, there could be a lot of different kinds of churches, but I, looking at that church, I was kind of like, this church doesn't have the feel of a church, of a Mormon church.
Oh, do you think that the Mormon church would allow them to film something that was critical of them in one of their church buildings? No, they wouldn't.
Yeah.
But I did listen to a podcast by Mormon Stories, John Dehlin, with these writers, and John Dehlin did point this out, like, the one male missionary, and they were like, we dropped the ball there. We thought we'd done our research. We'd asked people, and they were like, this is fine. And then they realized later, maybe that wasn't so accurate.
Yeah. Well, they only had the budget to pay one actor.
Right. That's probably what it was.
That's not true, but I'm just, Another point of accuracy, we get into the deeper levels of this basement. So now they've chosen the doors. One thing I love when they're choosing a door to go in, disbelief or belief, Sister Paxton represents the ultimate people pleaser. She's like, let's just choose the disbelief door because that's what he wants. We know that's just what he wants. So thank you so much. And thank you for letting us come to your home. And she's like still in people pleasing mode, which I was like, yep,
we've all been there.
Right. She knows what's what. She's like, let's just get out of here alive. Thank you so much. Creepy old man.
Right. But then Sister Barnes, right, she was the more cynical of the two, I guess. And she's like, no, we're doing belief. And I loved that scene when she came back at him and she said, I mean, this is what you want. You are studying us and she was talking back to this guy. And I was so proud of her. I loved what the film did with these two sister missionaries, rather than being these blind little sheep that are just going through the motions. I love how the writers portrayed them as intelligent and really wise beyond their years, and so put together and incredibly courageous, both of them. I thought remarkable.
Yeah. And we can see, because, in kind of like looking at their two characters, you can see how Sister Barnes obviously has more experience with trauma. She's talking, she she portrays a person who is not quite as happy-go-lucky, innocent as Paxton, because she's like, you can tell she's lived a little bit more of experience in that, her mentioning her dad who had died. And
the Taco Bell experience where she got, was it E. coli or some disease when she was sick? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you see that in her. She's like a little bit more haunted. She's a little bit more of a haunted soul. And when you go through the whole movie, you don't know at first, but Sister Paxton is really the heroine, because she's the one that goes through a pretty big change from who she is at the beginning to the experiences that she has. Sister Barnes kind of playing more of like a helper character, or somebody who gives her the tools she needs or the information she needs, to then for her to be able to be the hero kind of at the end, right?
Right.
So that's interesting, because she is very much like, you don't believe at the beginning that she would be the one who could stab him with the letter opener. And then by the end, she's like, I've got no problem stabbing him with a letter opener.
Right. It's amazing what that kind of fear and trauma and fight or flight will do to a person. And I thought it was a brilliant psychological thriller that way. Like thinking, what would I do in their shoes? You have no idea until you're in that situation, right?
Yeah. I can tell you one thing. I don't think I would have been the smart one to figure out what happened. She was able in that next room, that next level, with the whole contrived miracle, prophetess back to life, all that stuff. I don't know. I might have been the one who'd be like, whoa, did we just see a miracle? What just happened? Whereas
Right.
Sister Paxton is the one being like, I think I know what really happened. And she figured it out. And I'm like, wow, I'm actually really impressed. She was smart enough to figure it out. And terrifying when she goes even deeper into this house, into this mountain, into the next level to find the women in the cages, and there's nowhere else to go. Like, this is the end.
Right. And she was able to figure out how he got the bike lock there. She was able to figure out every step of the way, where I was like, wait a minute, what happened? And I usually pride myself in being like, oh yeah, I know what's happening here in the movie. But at the time I was like, how did she figure that out? You know?
Yeah. So while she's in absolute fight, flight, or freeze mode, high stress, high fear, somehow she was still able to work out the details, or like what happened. So that's it's kind of amazing. Like I would just be like, I don't know, kill me now. Just do it. Just get over it.
Right.
Totally. Yeah. So the code word, again, this is a very sore point for a lot of LDS members, because, growing up in the culture, in the covenants that are done in the temple, it's very sacred. And so magic underwear is a big trigger word for a lot of people. And it's the code word to stab him, which, can't help but be brought up, because, that takes us back to the beginning when they're being teased. The Sister Missionaries are teased by the sorority girls about their magic underwear. And, of course, the LDS blogger is like, we don't call it that. That's a really derogatory name. And I agree. I mean, that's not nice. That's not a term that we would call it. But it's something that I'm glad they at least put in some level in the movie as again, like the word of wisdom. It's like, you can't not mention this. They're known for it, right?
And the church members pride themselves in being a peculiar people. Yeah, it's nice to point out exactly why they are so peculiar. And that which makes them so different is the word of wisdom and the magic underwear.
Yeah. And that was a point of defensiveness for the LDS person reviewing this movie was, that's just another attempt at making us look really zany. Like when he brings out the Bob Ross Monopoly, and then he's like, then you have Mormonism. That's just like this. I actually laughed out loud in the theater. I was like, oh my gosh, like that is hilarious. Because growing up in the religion, you don't always totally know what the view is. Like, are we viewed as just another denomination of Christianity like many others, or are they like, whoa, those Mormons over there just got some zany ideas? And that kind of confirmed it for me.
Yeah, I went and saw the movie with a never Mormon friend of mine
Uh-huh.
who she moved to Utah. She and her husband moved here for work several years ago, and she grew up not religious at all, just a different part of the country. And she came here and she said, "What am I living among?" And she grew up in, she worked in Utah Valley for a while until just recently. And she was surrounded by just this Mormon culture. In fact, she just did a blog post about both of these things. She did Never Mormon's view on Heretic, and then she did a Never Mormon's view on what it's like to be raised in what she calls a cult. And it was really fascinating to go watch this movie with her because she guffawed. She laughed really hard at all of the same jokes I was laughing at because she had been part of this. And she's been fascinated with the church growing up or living amongst Mormons because she's like, not in a, I can't wait to join the religion kind of way, but in a, what the hell are you thinking kind of way. She really wants to understand it. And if you'd like to see her blog, it's ericarachelstone.com. And she's a fantastic writer. She's got really amazing stuff. Anyway.
Perfect. Yeah. We'll make sure that, and hopefully in the show notes, we can reference and resources that we brought up. So
cool.
But my personal relationship, I should say, with this magic underwear topic, when I was going to church, I did go through the temple, and I didn't have a lot of experience with the garments. My parents didn't wear them, so I was not fully aware of that aspect of it. And I was the one who thought it was really important that we go through the temple when I married my husband. He was not so much into that, but he was like, I was raised this way. This is what's expected of me. He was still in that mode. So I remember saying to him, yeah, I really do want to be married in the temple. It's really important to me. I want to be sealed with you forever. Families being together forever is a big selling point for that particular part of the doctrine. So I'm like, I want that. That's important to me. But I'm not wearing those garments. And it was my husband, who I will remind you, did not fully believe in them at all or any of it, was like, no, you have to. That's a rule. You have to. I mean, he was that indoctrinated. Like, oh, you have to. And it was always just a really, really, really hard thing for me. Like really, really hard to say, like, I have to wear these, very uncomfortable, very unpleasant, doesn't fit with anything.
Not attractive at all.
Not attractive. They never fit right. I don't know about it. I mean, I know I'm not the only one. I know I'm not. But yeah, I was like, can't they get Victoria's Secret to help us like engineer these better? Because they just don't fit on the body at all.
Right.
So, there's that. The thing about it, though, for me is just like there are certain symbols that are very sacred to certain cultures. I'm going to use like indigenous people's cultures as an example. There are certain symbols that they wear for ceremony or to mark a covenant or something that they've made. I respect that. I respect that symbol for people to make that a part of their life. But the real, now we're getting to the heart of it. Like the Mr. Reed's actual message here, what it's all coming down to in the very, very heart of this home that he's labyrinthed these girls into, is that it's more about control. And that's where I see it. That's where that comes into play for me. And when he's like, now you've guessed, have you finally got it? What is the one true religion?
Control.
And that's what it is. Yeah.
And she figured that out. So she did not walk out of there. Sister Paxton did not walk out of there, I'm sure, with the same belief she had before.
Yeah. And true to A24 movies, the ending is always a little bit vague or up in the air. You don't exactly know what happens next. For those who are familiar with the movie Midsummer, which we reviewed in the Witch Movie Project. It ends very kind of like, wait, what happens? What is she going to do next? And that's kind of their MO.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you think about the ending?
Like I said earlier, I didn't care for it because I am the type of person, I love closure, though I appreciate an artist's decision to allow the audience to make that interpretation for themselves, to leave it open in the air. I appreciate it. And at the same time, I'm like, no, but I need closure. I need to figure out what happens to her next. And so we get to create our own continuation of the story. And so I would hope that she gets to the police and they go and find all of those poor women caged in the basement, and they get them the help they need, because that's the compassionate part of me, and would get them reunited, get them the help they need so they can maybe have some kind of semblance of a good life. But maybe she dies out there in the wilderness because she's wounded, deeply, deeply wounded. And it's the middle of, like, she's been awake all night and it's cold and she's hungry. I mean, maybe she doesn't make it, but we get to interpret how we want to. And I guess that's kind of cool. And the Never Mormon friend and I that went to see this, I mean, she said, I think something's wrong with me. I wanted Mr. Reed to win because she was,
I mean,
so
most of us on the other side of deconstructing our faith or spirituality, I can kind of see it, because I mean, as the bad guy, he couldn't really let anybody live or leave, right? Because he would be arrested. Like,
right.
He would go and say, he's keeping women in his basement and he tried to keep me, and he'd be arrested. Mm-hmm. So we know this logically. And yet, for myself, I wanted her to escape and live, because that would have made the work he was trying to do of getting her to see this other way, it would have allowed that to happen so that she could leave, go live her life, and see the real world in a different way, and to be like, I don't have to live under someone else's control. What would true freedom actually look like for me? And that she would actually get to live that.
That's a great perspective. I like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, he had to die. And I was really sad that Sister Barnes had to die. I really liked her.
I did too.
Being a horror movie, we knew people were going to die.
Mm-hmm.
An A24 movie, it would be surprising if anybody lived, because for a lot of their movies, nobody lives. Everybody dies. So I was kind of going into it expecting that. I was kind of like, all right, here we go. Let's find out how this plays out. But I will point out too, just for funsies, but the closing credits, this was the first time a movie declared no AI generated images.
Oh.
So, just, I don't know if that's like historically for precedents moving forward, that movies will start to do that, so that looking back in the future, when all of the movies are AI generated, possibly, they'll look back on this movie and say, oh, look, there's a disclaimer. This movie had no AI generated images.
Interesting. I can see that being the future of film, though. We get AI generated media all of the time.
Yeah. Interesting. So, all right, final thoughts. Anything else that was stuck out we didn't cover?
Yeah, just a few things that I've seen some ex-Mormon content creators that I'm friends with online. They talked a little bit about the descent into the 3 different stages being like the anti-temple ceremony, the opposite. Because anyone who has been in the temple knows that you originally, of course, in the older temples, you would move. And I think they still do in the Manti Temple, and did in the Salt Lake Temple until recently. Instead of just staying in one room and watching the film, the people would move from one room to the next.
Oh, yeah.
And so, this is a progression into like the celestial kingdom. But this is the anti-temple ceremony where they were to make this descent into these 3 main rooms. I found it interesting by another TikToker who talked about the statue in the hallway before they went into the second room being a representation of Persephone from mythology, and talked about perhaps this was an allusion to like Persephone, who was taken down to hell in Greek mythology.
Yeah.
And then she also talked about Dante's Inferno, and there was this descent into hell when Dante did this during the Divine Comedy, which I haven't read, but I'm relatively familiar with. When he gets to the bottom, then it flips and becomes a mountain. And there's one scene where Sister Paxton walks down and the camera goes upside down. And she said it was mind-blowing to make that connection, which I thought was artistic and pretty amazing, and little Easter eggs that I was able to see the second time I went to see it.
Yes. Yeah. These types of movies, especially, it's worth a second, third, because a lot of times you miss things in the first one. And wasn't there an image of Dante's Inferno in the?
Yeah, there was.
Thought so.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Lots of symbolism. Very fascinating.
And I know it's a good movie when I'm thinking about it a week after I watch it. And I'm telling everyone I know, ex-Mormon, non-Mormon, active Mormon, I'm saying, go see this because it's worth it. And you may not enjoy it. There are some people who didn't, and that's okay, as you're able to do with any art form. But for me, I thought it was definitely worth watching.
Absolutely. And it kind of a borderline thriller, psychological thriller and horror movie kind of. You could kind of classify it in both of those things, a little bit of gore and some jump scares type of things that movies typically have. But I know a lot of us weren't even going for that, for the aspect of that. A lot of us, you and me probably both, were going because we're like, I need to find out how the church is going to be portrayed and represented in this movie.
Absolutely. And when I first saw the preview, and growing up, I hated horror movies. Like, I was afraid of my own shadow. I couldn't handle them. I wouldn't even watch A Quiet Place, which was actually written by the same guys who wrote Heretic.
Yeah.
I wouldn't watch that film because for me, I believed that as I did so, I was putting down my defenses, and I was going to be watching something that would offend the spirit and might invite like the adversary into my heart and mind. And I wouldn't do that. But once I deconstructed that aspect of faith, I've been like, yeah, bring on Quiet Place. I've been watching all 3 of them. And I loved them. And then when I saw this film preview, it was amazing to me to say, oh, this is a horror flick. This is an intense thriller. And I cannot wait to see it. And I went and saw it opening night because I didn't want any spoilers.
Oh, yeah.
It looked that good to me.
Yeah. I will have to put a spoiler alert disclaimer on the beginning of this episode before we release it. But that's, because we've talked about everything.
Yes, we have.
That's great. And I love also, this will be my final thought, but I love the reference to the Book of Mormon musical at the beginning, because Sister Paxton saying, like, I know we're made fun of. I know. And again, the writers of South Park and Book of Mormon musical are former Mormons, Trey Parker. Back when I was in high school, and again, this is like, I was still kind of, in the church, like I was going to church and that, but we used to love Orgasmo. If you've ever watched.
No, I'm not.
This is your next thing. But they portray Mormon missionary. Again, it's a comedy, but they have a Mormon missionary who on his mission needs to make, I can't remember it's like $1 million. I might have the facts wrong, but he has to make $1 million in order to marry his girlfriend in the temple. So he decides that on his mission, while he's still a missionary, he's going to start starring in pornography. And he becomes a superhero named Orgasmo that points his laser at people and they have orgasms. So it is hilarious. It does not portray Mormonism very accurately at all, but that's kind of also what makes it extra funny. Because those of us who are Mormon will be like, none of this was right, but it's so funny. When he talks on the phone to his girlfriend, they always end conversations with Jesus and I love you. And then they get on the phone. So my friends in high school and that was our big joke, is we would be on the phone with each other and we would go, okay, Jesus and I love you.
You were a naughty Mormon. I'm just telling you.
Like I said, I was a lot more nuanced than more people that I know.
Right.
Where I grew up, though, again, small town, it was very much you're either all in or you're all out.
Right.
So there wasn't a lot, which is why I didn't fit in ever anywhere, because either I was friends with the people who were probably grew up Mormon, but like did not want anything to do with it really as teenagers. Yeah. And I was like friends with them, and I'd be friends with those I went to church with. But they were probably the type that would carry their scriptures around all day at school.
Yeah.
You know the type. You were the type, right? You got it. I know. Because you had seminary at some point during the day that's right across the street from the high school. Yeah. So you had your scriptures, right? And you had to look like, I have to have my scriptures with me because I might pull them out and read them at any time. That kind of thing. I was neither of those. I was not really, I believed and I went to church, but I didn't feel the need to live like that. Like I just was like, I just do me. And I stood out like a sore thumb. I really didn't make a lot of close friends because nobody could understand me. They didn't understand who is this? Where is she coming from?
Right. I
didn't fit in anywhere. So yeah, that's where I come from in all this, but I'm super happy about my place in that now.
Yeah, I think you do fit in. You're remarkable. You're just a light. And I'm so glad that I know you, Courtney.
Well, thank you again so much for coming on here. And for those of you who are listening and want to follow you on TikTok and your awesome videos about deconstruction and about your experiences, and even my favorites, your comments, your comment replies to other people's comments, which are always just kind of like me sitting there eating popcorn, watching them like, oh, get her, but that's me. Where can they find you on TikTok? People want to find you.
Find me at Midlife Exmo on TikTok, and soon I'll have videos on YouTube and Instagram as well. And I'm just looking forward to building community and having more conversations like this where we can deconstruct with community and with support. I think it's really important.
It is important work you do. And for anybody that is in that deconstruction phase and needs a little bit of healing, needs a little bit of guidance to figure out who is that real true self within you that is looking for that truth, that authentic self, not told to you by someone else or someone who claims authority over you, but finding what is my voice, what is my belief, what is my spirituality, or what does that look like? I highly recommend a session with me. I do Reiki and emotional processing. Emotional processing, I highly recommend for people going through deconstruction. It's very powerful. Or an intuitive card reading, tarot and oracle decks that can give you a little bit of clarity on that. Give you a connection back to your own intuition, if you will. And you can find me on TikTok at Prism Healing, PRISM, M as in Michael, healing. Or you can find me on Instagram at prism_healing, or on Facebook, Courtney Pearl's Prism Healing. All of those, I'm all over the place. So come and find me and we'll chat about all your awesome experiences. I would like to just take an opportunity to thank Ride the Wave Media, who produces and puts out this podcast, and Just Blaine, who is the CEO and producer of the podcasts. Thank you so much for all the work you do, and go live a good life.
I love that. That's a great tagline. Go live a good life.
Go live a good life.
Love it.
Oh, awesome.
Thank you, Courtney. That was great.